Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of 2 Samuel. Today we're in 2 Samuel chapter 21, and we come to a section that maybe isn't as well known as many of the other parts of David's life in 2 Samuel, and yet there are a number of things to point out from this particular passage of Scripture. This is going to concentrate on two different sections of David's life in this area. The first one is going to be with the interaction with the Gibeonites. And the second is going to be with the Philistines and the continuing situations that come with the giants among the Philistines. Let's start with the Gibeonites. When you come into verses 1 through 3, there's going to be a famine in the days of David that's going to last for 3 years. And David is going to ask God why the famine is going on, and he says it's because of Saul. Now, Saul hasn't been king for 30 years, but there were things that Saul did that have not yet been made right, and it's going to impact the Gibeonites. And that's where we want to start, because the Gibeonites are not necessarily somebody that are a group of people that is new to the Old Testament, but they are not a people that has been heard from in the Old Testament in quite some time. If you go back to Joshua chapter 9, you read there about how the people of Gibeon, while Joshua is leading the conquering of the land, are going to decide through subterfuge to put themselves in a contract or put themselves in an alliance with the people of God, which they were not actually supposed to do or looking to do. And yet they are going to trick Joshua and the Israelites into forming a pact with them. And that pact, once it is made, has to be upheld. Well, the indication is from 2 Samuel chapter 21 that while Saul was king, Saul put forth a vendetta against the Gibeonites. Now, the Gibeonites had agreed as a part of this that they were going to live under the rule of the Israelites, that they were going to follow the laws and the commands of the Israelites and all of these various kinds of things. And yet Saul is going to utilize his time as king to try to root out and destroy the Gibeonites. He is going to kill many of the Gibeonites. Now, this is an event that we do not read of specifically in the book of 1 Samuel when we read of Saul's time as king. And yet it is something that is going to be discussed here in 2 Samuel regarding David needing to get justice for the things that were done. And so David is going to call the Gibeonites in, and they are going to basically be able to, as it were, name their price for what it would take to satisfy the blood of all of their family members that have been slain at the hands of Saul while he was king. And ultimately, what they ask for are 7 of the family of Saul. This goes back to the principle of an eye for an eye in the Old Testament, and the response of blood, especially blood of the innocent that is brought about by wrong means. And so the Gibeonites are going to seek justice in this way, and David is going to grant it to them because in many ways he can't not grant it to them because of the laws of the land and because of the current situation in which he finds himself. The one thing that he does do in all of this is he ensures that Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, is not going to be the one of those that is going to be sent to the Gibeonites. Now, there is a Mephibosheth that is going to be sent, if you look at the text, but it's not the same one. And as a matter of fact, it specifically says that David saves Mephibosheth, and then it lists a Mephibosheth among the sons of Rizpah. But you have the Gibeonites who are going to seek justice for what it is that they have done, or what it is that has been done to them. But in the second place, when you are in chapter 21, you have the burying of the bones of Saul and Jonathan and the 7 sons of Saul, or grandsons of Saul, as the case might be, that are going to be taken and buried. And this is going to be a sign of respect and of the fact that David is going to show respect to the families, because remember, Saul and Jonathan are not going to be buried in the family tomb, as it were, at this time. And so David is going to bring about the respect of bringing them to the family burying place where Kish, Saul's father, is buried, as well as burying these 7 sons and grandsons there as well. And so David is going to give them a burial of respect. Now somebody says, well, why didn't it happen before this? We don't know. David obviously wasn't around at Saul's death. David was not around when the men of Jabesh Gilead went to get the bodies of Saul and Jonathan and to bring them back. And so those may very well have just been things that had slipped through the cracks. Also remember that when Saul dies, Saul still has a son that is living in Ishbosheth, who is going to work with David, or work against David for control of the kingdom for 7 years. And so there's a lot that goes on in the intervening time and a lot of reasons why this might not have already been done. And yet David here is going to make sure that it is done. The final thing that I notice in chapter 7, or chapter 21 rather, is down in verse 15, where there you begin to have the statements about the giants and the Philistines and the continuing battles, and all of these don't happen at once, but it's kind of a pulling together of a number of events that take place over the course of several years and bringing them into one summation together. But here in verse 15, we have an interesting thing about David. And that is that David goes out and fights against the Philistines, but he becomes faint. He becomes weak. The indication seems to be, more than anything else, David is getting old. By this particular time, David is likely in his 60s, at least his late 50s to early 60s. He has been king for almost 30 years. And he has been through many battles. He has been through many wars. He has been on the run and or fighting from the time he was a teenager, and his body's getting old. His body is getting weaker. And the response of the people is not, hey, our king is getting weak, we need to get rid of him. But instead it is, David is simply at the point we cannot let him go out anymore. And then they tell him in verse number 17, they said, you shall not go out to battle anymore, lest the lamp of Israel be quenched. In other words, if David dies, they feel the nation dies, especially if he dies in battle, and especially if he dies under those circumstances. And remember, we've just talked about the fact that's how Saul died. Saul died on the battlefield, and it threw the nation into turmoil. They do not want that to happen again with David, because David's already had to deal with rebellions and uprisings and various other things amongst his people. And so now you have a situation where David's men, the people that serve David, the people that are loyal to David, are trying their best to take care of their king. And so you see their willingness to even speak up to the king and tell him, you can't do this anymore because we want you to be around for quite a while longer. And the indication is that David is going to agree to that, and that he is not going to go out to battle any longer. These are some of the things that I have found in 2 Samuel chapter 21. I hope they're beneficial to you. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Samuel chapter 22. But until then, have a great day.